Hello, and welcome to part 3 of the landmark 100th installment of KRAD COVID Readings. I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido, continuing to read my writings to entertain you during these ridiculous times we find ourselves in. Before we start part 3, I want to remind you all that you can find me online at DeCandido.net, which, among other things, has a link to my Patreon, which you should totally support because it's awesome. For $1 a month, you get a monthly movie review. For $5 a month, you get the movie... Actually, for $2 a month, you get a monthly movie review and regular cat pictures with our incredibly photogenic cats, who have several times photobombed this reading series. For $5 a month, you get the movie review, the cat pictures, and at least one and sometimes as many as 5 or 6 TV reviews per month. For $7, you get those 3 things, plus a weekly excerpt from one of my works in progress. For $10 a month, you get all that stuff, plus a monthly vignette featuring one of my original characters from the Dragon Precinct universe, the Super City Cops universe, the Cassie Zukov universe, or the Brom Gold universe. And for $20 a month, you get all that stuff, plus first looks at my first drafts. Whenever I finish a chapter in a book or a short story, you will get to see the first draft of it. Go to patreon.com/crad. The most you'd spend is $20 a month. Least you'd spend is $1 a month, and either way, anything in the middle, and you get neat content. So please check it out. Continuing in part 3, we are seeing the Sonya Gomez-Kieran Duffy relationship as it played out over the 2nd through 5th seasons of Star Trek The Next Generation. Gomez was established in the 2nd season episodes Q, Who, and Samaritan Snare. Duffy was established in the 3rd season episode Hollow Pursuits. And we basically decided that they had a relationship while they were on the ship together, and then they started it back up when they served on the Da Vinci. The whole point of this flashback story of Many Splendors is that it shows an engine room's eye view of the events of Star Trek The Next Generation, specifically as it pertained to Duffy and Gomez. These next 3 chapters that I'm going to do this week include, take place around the episodes of The Bonding in Chapter 6. Chapter 7 will be The Hunted, and then Chapter 8 will be The Best of Both Worlds, which will be lots of fun. Anyway, Chapter 6 of Many Splendors. Captain's Log, Stardate 43198.7. The Enterprise remains in standard orbit while we investigate the tragedy which has struck the away team. Lieutenant Mala Asta, ship's archaeologist, has been killed in what should have been a routine mission. Whatever the explanation, it will not bring back a valued and trusted officer. Hey, Sonya, wait up. Sonya paused to let Kieran catch up with her in the Deck 10 corridor. She was heading to the turbo lift and thence to engineering. Both were on beta shift now. They've been assigned there for the past few weeks, ever since their encounter with the Shellyak, which started in a few minutes. She'd been grabbing a bite to eat in 10 forward and reading a fascinating article in the latest JOM about soliton waves. What's up, Kieran? You've been holding out on me, Ensign. Frowning, Sonya said, I don't know what you mean. Then she added with a smile, Lieutenant. He grinned back at her. I mean, you never told me Belinda Gomez was your sister. Well, it's not like it's a secret or anything. Sonya tried not to sound defensive. The fact of the matter was she had kept it a secret. She had enough of dealing with being in the shadow of her sister, the soccer star, for most of her teen years, through to her time at the academy. You never asked. Oh, okay, I'll remember that from now on when I meet people. Say, you don't happen to have any famous siblings or other relatives? I mean, come on, Sonya. It's not like most people would keep that a secret. She's a great player. I know, I just... She sighed. I spent a lot of time being in her shadow, that's all. You know, she saved my life when we were kids. I fell into the Gulf of Mexico when we were out on a rowboat, and she dived in and kept me from drowning. Sonya shook her head. That was just the start. After that, it was always, why can't you be like your sister? You should invite her on the ship, then. You'll eclipse her in a nanosecond. Sonya gave Kieran a dubious look. Come on, I'm just an engineer. Just an engineer. Kiddo, you've been Geordi's golden girl for months. Besides, who else would have the chutzpah to spill hot chocolate on a god? At that, Sonya couldn't help but laugh. Just recently, the natives of Mintaka 3 had mistaken the captain for a deity. It had taken a certain amount of work, and a near-fatal injury to Picard, to convince the Mintakans that the Enterprise captain was not divine. It's not that big a deal, she said as they approached the turbolift. She's just my sister. Ha! There's no such thing as just a sister. I've got one too, you know, Amy. Devoted her life to making mine a living hell. Why do you think I signed up for Starfleet? Gets me far away from her and her practical jokes. They stood and waited for a turbolift. Since when do you have a problem with practical jokes? Sonya, in particular, was recalling an incident involving ensigns McKnight and Prixis that required a molecular debonder to be applied in sickbay to their hair. The joke around the ship was that incident in particular that led to Dr. Pulaski transferring off the Enterprise. I have no problems with my practical jokes. It's hers that are the issue. There was this one time. The doors opened to reveal LaForge. Right around the time Pulaski left, to be replaced by the woman she replaced, Beverly Crusher, Wesley's mother, LaForge had been promoted to lieutenant commander. According to what both Kieran and Denny had heard, LaForge had had several of his personnel requests denied because the people he wanted were full lieutenants, and Starfleet wasn't comfortable with a chief engineer not being the senior-ranked person in the engine room. LaForge expressed his frustration to Riker expressed it to Picard, and the captain gave LaForge a field promotion to lieutenant commander after only 1 year as a full lieutenant. Duffy, just the man I want to see. You need to come with me to the transporter. What's happening? Sonya asked. The away team got into a scrape. A bomb went off. Sonya's stomach fell. Is everyone okay? She knew that Worf was leading the team, which also included one civilian scientist who was on loan to Starfleet, and 2 archaeologists, Marla Astor and Leo Antonitis. LaForge shook his head. Lieutenant Astor didn't make it. Kieran's eyes went wide. Oh my God. Commander Riker wants us to go down there, figure out what happened. Ensign Gomez, report to engineering. You're in charge till I get back. That surprised Sonya. She guessed that all the junior-grade lieutenants on Beta Shift were going on the team. Yes, sir. Duffy? They proceeded to the forward turbo lift that would take them to the transporter. Sonya shivered as she stepped onto the lift. She didn't really know Marla Astor that well, but she did know that she was a single mother and had a son on board the ship. What'll happen to him? Beta Shift had been tense and unpleasant. It was one thing when people died in battle, as they did against the Borg, but stupid accidents like this didn't sit right with anyone. Sonya found herself reminded of the conversation she'd had with Kieran about Captain Schoenhertz and space being mean and or indifferent. After the shift ended, she went to 10 forward and found Kieran nursing an ale. She asked Guinan for a tequila, and then went over to Kieran's table. That's not hot chocolate, is it? Seemingly despite himself, Kieran laughed. No, it's ale. Mind if I join you? Never, Kieran said, the word rather emphatically. Sonya took a seat. Guinan brought the tequila over. She held it up and gave the toast that they had told her at the academy was traditional when comrades were lost in battle. Absent friends. Yeah. They both drank. You knew her, didn't you? Sonya asked. Kieran nodded. We met right after she came on board about 18 months ago. She was having some kind of problem with the replicator in her cabin. Wouldn't give her kid his favorite drink, which was this vile fruit concoction. So I fixed it, and we got to talking. Even went on a date or two. Nothing really materialized, though. I don't think she was entirely over her husband, you know? Sonya nodded, though she, in fact, didn't know. She never lost anyone closer to her than 3 grandparents she hardly knew. Still, she was a great lady. And Jeremy's a really good kid. God, I don't know what's going to happen to him. What was she like? Kieran spent the next half hour or so telling Sonya various and sundry facts about Lieutenant Marla Astor, from her proclivity for pink clothing while off duty, to her ability to talk for several hours at a time on the subject of the amazing discoveries on Juriosa, to her courtship with her husband when they were both studying at Endurance University on Mars. The recollections were interrupted by LaForge's voice on the intercom. Lieutenant Duffy, Ensign Gomez, report to main engineering. They exchanged glances, gulped down the rest of their drinks, and headed out. Wonder what's up, Kieran said. And hey, Sonya. Thanks. As they approached the turbo lift, Sonya smiled up at him. No problem, Kieran. You were there for me when I was moping in 10 forward after the Borg. It seemed only fair to return the favor. Yeah. Chapter 7. Captain's Log. Stardate 43489.2. We have arrived at Angosia 3, a planet that has expressed a strong desire for membership in the Federation. Prime Minister Nayrock has taken Commander Riker and me on a tour of the capital city. Garfield Costa, step forward. Next to Sonya, Guard took a single step forward. They were in formation in engineering, along with Ensigns Kornblum, Russell, Sherman, and Van Mater, facing Geordi LaForge and Data. Behind the chief engineer and the second officer were the rest of the engineering staff, most with big smiles on their faces. Several of them had already been promoted as well. Geordi had gone in reverse order of rank, ending with the ensigns who were making JG. Data handed Geordi a box, which he opened to reveal a hollow pip. He stepped forward and affixed it to Gar's collar. I hereby promote you to the rank of junior grade lieutenant, with all the duties and privileges that entails. Gar nodded, beaming. Thank you, sir. He stepped back, and Geordi said, Sonya Gomez, step forward. Until he said those words, Sonya hadn't been able to bring herself to believe that she was really being promoted. Indeed, ever since the infamous hot chocolate incident, she'd been convinced that her collar would go without any more pips until she finally took the hint and resigned her commission and went into a line of work where she could do less damage. But after the Enterprise's mission to the Romulan neutral zone ended, the promotion list came out, and Sonya was thrilled to see her name on it. Among other things, it meant she got a cabin to herself. Not that she had anything against Leon, but she hadn't had a room to herself since she was 17. Besides, Leon's name had also been on the promotion list, so she was getting a cabin of her own, too, where she said she intended to celebrate along with another new promotion, Lieutenant Tanaka, one of the medical technicians, whom she'd been seeing for several weeks now. Ella Clancy had also been promoted. Sadly, Tess Allenby wasn't, which Sonya feared would simply make her friend even more bitter toward Wes. In fact, Tess was the only member of the corner office who remained an ensign. Kieran hadn't been on the list either, which meant that he and Sonya were now of equal rank. Sonya wasn't sure how she felt about that. Sonya stood proudly as Geordi affixed the hollow pip to her collar. I can't believe this is happening. I hereby promote you to the rank of junior grade lieutenant with all the duties and privileges. Feeling like she was going to explode, Sonya said, Thank you, sir! Then she realized what she'd done. Geordi, however, just shook his head and chuckled. Cat and tails. He finished. Everyone else laughed as well. To her amazement, Sonya didn't feel embarrassed. She was too happy. Data and Geordi went down the line to the other engineering ensigns in alphabetical order, ending with Helga. Afterward, everyone in engineering cheered. Even Data, after a fashion. Turning to Lieutenant de la Guardia, Geordi said, We gotta get to the bridge. You're in charge, Alfredo. Yes, sir, the newly promoted full lieutenant said. Data and Geordi departed. Sonya knew that Picard and Riker were going to be given a tour of the Angosian capital, so Data was in command of the ship, and Geordi liked to put in time on the bridge, she knew. She suspected that this was a holdover from his time as Alpha Shift con officer, before he was given the chief job. If there was one thing she'd learned about Geordi in a year on the Enterprise, it was that he liked to be in the thick of things. Kieran walked up to her. Congrats, Sonya. See, I told you. Watch it. Inside a few years, you'll be running this place, while I'll be just still be an ordinary JG. Hey, don't be so sure of that, Alfredo de la Guardia said. You got yourself a mighty fine performance review there, Duff. I did? Kieran sounded surprised. He did? Sonya sounded the same. Hey! Now Kieran was outraged. Alfredo shrugged. His work's picked up. Maybe you're a good influence on him. With that, Alfredo walked away. Sonya wasn't sure what to make of that. The festivities concluded, it was time to go back to work. With the promotion, Gomez was put in charge of the Warp Core, which had been De La Guardia's responsibility. LaForge generally preferred to rotate folks so they were experienced in all aspects of engineering, not just their individual specialty, but he said Sonya's antimatter expertise would prove handy, especially since the Enterprise's warp drive had gotten a lot more and varied use in the past couple of years than expected. The Galaxy class was still a relatively new design after all, though the Borg threat had sent Utopia Planitia into overdrive with new ship concepts, and could, Geordi said, use some handholding. As she ran a diagnostic on the Warp Core, she thought about Alfredo's words. She hadn't really seen herself as influencing Kieran in any way. True, they'd been spending more time together lately. She found she was enjoying his company more and more, in part because he seemed to be taking life more seriously. Or maybe it was just that she was taking life less seriously. The promotion to JG had validated what Geordi, not to mention Ella, Leon, Kieran, Wes, and pretty much everyone else on board had been saying for a year now. She deserved to be here. And she learned quite a bit. Probably more in 1 year on this vessel than she had in 4 years at the Academy. She'd hot-wired an 80-year-old impulse drive, helped outwit some alien kidnappers, done damage control against foes ranging from the Borg to out-of-date Klingons, to unknown aliens, to a 10,000-year-old booby trap, and learned so much about different approaches to ship engineering. More important, though, she had learned what Geordi had instructed her to learn. To relax. General Quarters. All off-duty and civilian personnel report to quarters immediately. Sonya looked up sharply as she entered main engineering to report for her second day of duty as a lieutenant. The computer's instruction didn't apply to her as she had just come on duty, but she wondered what had prompted it. Yesterday, the Enterprise had taken on an Angosian prisoner named Roga Danar, and this morning was transferring him back to a penal colony on one of Angosia's moons. Sonya's initial thought, what could possibly have gone wrong, was immediately suppressed. A year on the U.S.S. Enterprise had wrested out of her the notion that nothing could go wrong, almost as fast as the notion that there were things that didn't have a solution. From transporter control, Cliff Meyer said, "I don't believe this. Danar broke out of the transporter field." "That's not possible," Kieran said. Geordi ran over to stand behind Cliff. "I've seen this guy in action, Duffy. Don't be so sure of that." From behind Sonya at the main console, Ensign Koji Oliver said, "Turbo lifts are down. Security fields going up on the lower decks." Then he frowned. "Turbo lifts are back up." "Who ordered that?" Sonya asked. "The bridge." Gar sounded as confused as Sonya. Geordi went over to the main console next to Koji. "Probably a trick. Everyone on the ship knows the turbo lift should be down, but Danar may not. If he sees the lifts are working, he might take one and then we'd get him." "Sir," Kieran said, "I'm not tracking Danar at all. Are we sure he's loose?" "He's invisible to sensor scans," Geordi said. "Oh, sorry, sir." Sonya sighed. Kieran should have known that. "Phaser on overload! Seal this deck!" That was Worf's voice over the speaker. Before Sonya could even register the words, Geordi had pounced on the console and sealed off Section 12 of Deck 36. Sonya held her breath as the seconds ticked by. Then, "Captain, the overload has been averted." Everyone in engineering exhaled. Geordi lowered the force field in that section, but kept the security fields up. Sonya went back to the warp core to see that her diagnostic was done, and the warp core was functioning normally. "It'll be okay," Kieran said. "I'm sure Worf will take care of this guy." "Hang on, something's wrong," Koji said. "One of the force fields on this deck just went down. The bridge didn't." Koji's words were cut off, and Sonya heard something fall. She whirled around to see Koji being flipped over someone's back and onto the console by a fast-moving figure, who backhanded Geordi hard enough to knock his visor off. Both Kieran and Cliff moved to stop him, but they were taken down too. Sonya was about to cry out Kieran's name as he crumpled broken to the deck, but before she could, she felt a blow to the side of her head, and the universe went dark. The next thing Sonya knew, she was lying on a biobed in sickbay, a throbbing, nauseating pain in her head, and Nurse Temple standing over her. What happened?" "You're fine, Lieutenant. Just a bump on the head. You'll be okay in a little while." "Kieran, Geordi, engineer..." She tried to sit up. This proved a rather big mistake, as the room started jumping around, bouncing back and forth, and generally behaving in a very silly manner. She quickly lay back down. The nurse smiled and said, "Notice I didn't say you'd be okay now. Rest, all right? The doctor will be by to see you in a second." Temple walked off. Sonya looked around, saw Cliff and Gar, as well as Dershowitz from security on 3 other biobeds, and Koji sitting on the central biobed holding his right arm gingerly, while Dr. Crusher applied a boner to it. What happened to Kieran? Sonya realized that was the foremost thing on her mind. The last thing she saw before being rendered insensate was Kieran falling to the floor. She didn't know if he was alive or dead, and the fact that he might be dead scared her, even more than the notion that Geordi or anyone else might be. She figured that everything was fine, that Worf caught Danar, or at the very least that Danar was no longer a threat, since everyone in sickbay seemed fairly calm. But that left her with her own thoughts, which were primarily of Kieran. "I've been an idiot," she realized. Not that this was a huge revelation. She'd been an idiot in some manner or other for most of the last year, but that didn't make it any less so. She'd been making excuses for not pursuing a relationship with Kieran, all of which sounded very reasonable when she'd spelled them out at the corner office, and which sounded completely ridiculous in light of what had just happened. What if the Borg come to the Alpha Quadrant? What if the next time we're in the Romulan neutral zone, the captain doesn't have 2 Klingon ships up his sleeve? What if one of those weird anomalies we come across blows us to bits? What if the next computer virus sends us the way of the Yamato? Dr. Crusher finished with Koji and walked over to check on Sonya. A smile on her pretty pale face, she went over Sonya with her scanner. "You're looking more awake, Lieutenant. How do you feel?" "Nauseous, and my head hurts." "Perfectly normal." She pulled a hypo out of her blue lab coat pocket and applied it to Sonya's neck. Almost immediately, her head cleared, and her stomach felt like a stomach again instead of a whirligig. "That'll mask the symptoms until the concussion subsides. I wouldn't recommend returning to duty until your next shift starts, which, according to the duty roster, isn't for another 20 hours. Sonya blinked in surprise. It had only been 4 hours since she'd gone on duty and GQ was sounded. "Thank you, Doctor. Doctor?" "Yes?" "What happened?" Crusher chuckled. "Sorry, I guess you couldn't have known. Danar managed to escape. Nobody was killed, thankfully. Worf got a few bruises, Lieutenant Myers and Costa also got concussions, Ensign Oliver broke his arm, and Lieutenant Duffy cracked a rib. Everyone else was just stunned a bit." Sonya felt a profound sense of relief at the fact that Kieran was okay. "Now get some rest. Doctor's orders." Smiling, Sonya lazily raised her right arm in salute. "Yes, sir." She let herself drift off to sleep, thinking that she needed to talk to Keiko The pleasant scent of wild roses from Earth, toyar from Beta Z, and fire flowers from Berengaria wafted in the carefully circulated air of the Enterprise's arboretum on Deck 17. Sonya stood in the middle of the tree nursery. The flowers in question were in the main part of the arboretum, knowing that what she was doing was crazy. She had talked with Keiko, who had assured her that she would keep the tree nursery clear from 1900 onward. Keiko had a twinkle in her eye, adding, "It's about time you two got your act together." But then Keiko had recently started seeing Chief O'Brien, so she had such things on her mind anyhow. In fact, Keiko's recent romantic bent had been one of the deciding factors in her choosing the Arboretum as the site for her and Kieran's rendezvous. Rendezvous, listen to me. Bad enough I lied to Kieran to get him here, telling him there was a symposium. Guess I just wanted to hedge in case he said no or wasn't interested. Sonya hadn't been on a date since she was a young teenager. She'd been too busy pushing herself to the next level, whether it was school, the academy, or the Enterprise. By deceiving Kieran, it gave him an easy out, in case she totally made a targ's ear out of the whole thing. She was dressed in civilian clothes, a loose brown blouse and equally loose pants of the same color over black boots. It was, as far as she could remember, the first time she'd worn anything other than her uniform when not in her cabin. Leanne had joked that she needn't have bothered packing clothes when she'd come on board, but it wasn't right to show up for a date in uniform. A little after 1900, being on time had never been Kieran's strong suit, she went out to stand near the aft door. A few minutes later, Kieran walked up to her. He was wearing a dark blue short-sleeved shirt with a yellow jacket over it, his pants the same color as the jacket. At first she winced until she realized that the color perfectly matched the toyar, which were in full bloom, and which Keiko had made the centerpiece of the Arboretum. That didn't make the outfit any more palatable, but Sonya resolved to live with it as long as the clothes remained on. She found herself hoping that wouldn't be too terribly long. He offered her his arm, which she took with a smile, and they both entered the aft door. "I guess we're the first ones here," he said, as the door closed behind them with a soft swish. The smile growing, Sonya reached up and gently turned and lowered Kieran's chin toward her. His brown eyes were filled with surprise, anticipation, and confusion all at the same time. She whispered, "Kieran, there's no symposium." Her hand moved up to his cheek, and she craned her neck to kiss him full on the lips. To her great relief, he returned the kiss, though it took him until after she'd grabbed the back of his head to pull him closer that he thought to put his arms around her. Chapter 8. Captain's Log. Stardate 43992.6. Admiral Hansen and Lieutenant Commander Shelby of Starfleet Tactical have arrived to review the disappearance of the New Providence colony. No sign remains of the 900 inhabitants. They were the best months of Sonya's life. Geordi wasted very little time in putting them on separate shifts. He had no problem with fraternization in theory, but he also wanted his people focused on their work, not on each other. So Sonya was put in charge of Gamma Shift, which was a promotion of sorts since she was responsible for the entire engineering section during the night hours. Kieran, meanwhile, worked Alpha with Geordi. The relationship seemed to do them both good. Kieran received more commendations, and he said he was taking the initiative more. As for Sonya, Gamma Shift seemed to respond well to her leadership skills, which amazed her, as she hadn't been aware she had any leadership skills. In fact, Commander Kern, of all people, a Klingon who'd temporarily taken over as first officer as part of an exchange program, had given her a satisfactory rating for her work on Gamma Shift, notable for it being the only satisfactory rating he gave to anyone. Working on Alpha, Kieran tended to have the best stories, from him and Chief O'Brien unwittingly contaminating the ship with Invidium, which led to Kieran being teased almost as much as Sonya had been after the hot chocolate incident, to preparing a meeting room for the Lagarin negotiation. Not that it was all fun. Bernie Kornblum had been killed and shot by an Ansata terrorist who was attempting to blow up the ship, and everyone had believed Data to be dead as well, though that turned out to be a ruse. Several people had also been injured in an attack by a Romulan vessel during the encounter with Tin Man. Still, things were going very well. The Enterprise did a lengthy survey of the Zeta Gillis cluster, which included a rather bizarre first contact. Geordi started dating Christy Henshaw, which benefited the entire engineering staff, as it meant their boss was in a perpetual good mood. Kieran had joined the corner office, replacing Leanne, who'd been transferred to the Hood, where she'd be the Beta Shift ops officer under Riker's former CEO, Captain DeSoto. West had been given a commission to ensign, complete with red uniform and pip, an action that pleased everybody except Tess Allenby. All was well on the Starship Enterprise. And then the Borg returned. It started with the New Providence colony on Jure 4, which had been destroyed in a manner similar to those of the planets that the Enterprise scanned in System J25 in the Delta Quadrant. A Borg expert named Elizabeth Shelby had been detached to the Enterprise to verify the likelihood that the Borg were responsible, which she did in short order. Sonya hadn't been able to sleep the night before. Kieran, of course, slept like a rock. He'd been on board when they didn't last encounter the Borg, but for him it was just one more mission. For Sonya, it had been a lot more. When she came on for Gamma Shift, Geordi, Wes, Data, Marguerite Sherman, and Big A Ampalion were all standing around the main console, along with a blonde wearing a Red Lieutenant Commander's uniform. Sonya assumed this to be the infamous Shelby. "Look at Commander Borg go," Helga Van Mater muttered when Sonya walked past her. "Commander Borg?" Sonya said with a smile. "Well, she's supposed to be the expert. Never mind that we're the only ones who actually saw the damn things. But hey, she's the expert. You know she beamed down early with Data? I heard Riker shoot her aft shields after that one. Especially after she cleaned him out in poker." "She cleaned out Riker?" Helga nodded. Several hours into Gamma, Riker came by asking for a report. "Everybody's up late tonight," Helga muttered. "Can you blame them?" Sonya asked. "Not really. God, I hope they're wrong." "Yeah." "Commander, I think we should call it a night." Riker's voice carried across engineering. Sonya looked over to see that Riker, who had been sitting on the console's edge in front of Big A and Marguerite, was now standing. "That's an order. We'll reconvene at 0500. 4 whole hours of sleep, Sonya thought, then realized she was being unfair. Besides, Geordi and Wes were the types to keep gnawing at a problem until they'd completely chewed it, and Data never slept anyhow. Shelby then said, "Sir, if I may be allowed to continue with Mr. Data, who does not require rest." "You need rest, Commander," Riker said. For anybody else, that would have been it. In fact, if Shelby had really gotten the reaming Helga had described, she wouldn't have even gone that far. Instead, she went further. "If we have a confrontation with the Borg without improving our defense systems," "If we have a confrontation," Riker said firmly, "I don't want a crew fighting the Borg at the same time they're fighting their own fatigue. Dismissed." With that, Shelby left, quickly followed by the others. Geordi gave Sonya a nod, which she returned. Hours later, at 0415, Geordi came running into engineering. His uniform was rumpled as if he'd slept in it and hadn't bothered to change into a new one. All things considered, Sonya figured that to be precisely the case. "Geordi?" Sonya said quizzically. "I got an idea while I was sleeping. Something I read about shield mutation modification." Sonya frowned. "You mean the talk Tadar gave at the FES?" Snapping his fingers, Geordi said, Yes, that's the one. If we modify the shield mutation, we might be able to hold off the Borg attack." Sonya thought over what the Vulcan scientists said at the Federation Engineering Symposium. Tadar's hypothesis was that the emitters would have to be realigned. She shook her head. "Geordi, that'd take days." "We probably don't have days." Geordi let out a long breath. "Okay, start on it at least. At this point, every little bit will help." Suddenly, without being entirely sure why, Sonya said, "The Klingons!" Geordi gave her what might have been a penetrating gaze if his eyes were actually visible. "I'm sorry?" Then it all came back to her, leaping forward from her subconscious, which had made her utter the phrase in the first place. "I just read a monograph last week by a Klingon engineer named Kieran. Something about altering shield configuration. John translated it and ran it. Computer, call up the monograph from the most recent Journal of Applied Warp Mechanics by Kieran, daughter of Haleka." The screen in front of Sonya and Geordi lit up with the text from the journal. She started scanning. "There we go!" She highlighted a paragraph and enlarged it. Geordi read it over, seeing that it was a program for remodulating shields that would not require realigning the emitters. The intent was to be able to modify shields in battle. "This'll work. We're not reconfiguring, we're remodulating, but the theory should still apply." Grinning, Geordi gave Sonya a pat on the arm. "Nice work, Sonya." Beaming, Sonya said, "Thank you, sir. You and Van Mater get on this right away, and then when Gamma's over, you all go to bed." Sonya hesitated. "But if we're not finished, give it to Duffy and Barclay. What Commander Riker said to Shelby applies to you too." Sonya was about to object, pointing out that she hadn't been able to sleep in any case, when Geordi said, "Trust me, we'll come across the Borg soon enough, and when we do, I'm going to be asking 200% from everyone. Until then, though, I want you all rested. It's an order, Lieutenant." Those last 4 words were said in as formal a tone as Geordi LaForge ever used. Straightening, Sonya said, "Yes, sir, Commander." Geordi relaxed again. "All right. I'm going to see what we can do about phasers. Higher EM frequencies might mess up their subspace feed. Commander LaForge, report to the observation lounge." That was Riker. Tapping his comm badge, Geordi said, "On my way, Commander." He looked at Sonya. "Get to work. Then get some sleep." Sonya nodded. "Sealing doors to core chamber. Warning. Inner hull failure. Decompression danger. Deck 36, Section 4. Sealing main engineering." The computer's announcement sent Sonya rocketing awake from a fitful sleep. "Kieran!" She leapt out of bed, still in full uniform, having feared that this very thing might happen while she slept, and not wanting to waste any time getting on duty where she was needed. As she entered the turbo lift, her comm badge chirped. "LaForge, to all off-shift engineering personnel, report to Lieutenant Duffy on Deck 36. I'll be on the bridge." Relief washed over Sonya at the news that Kieran was okay. Maybe they were lucky and they were able to evacuate before engineering was sealed off. Kieran was waiting when she arrived at the main engineering console. The core chamber was behind a blast door. Also present were about a dozen engineers, plus some people from security. Sonya tried to think about who she didn't see. Alfredo de la Guardia, Denny Russell, Big A. Ampelion, Beth Bracken, Cliff Myers. When everyone arrived, Kieran, sounding more grave than Sonya had ever heard him speak, said, "The Borg cut into the deck, causing a hull breach. 19 people were unable to get out of the area, of which we scanned 11 outside the hull." Lieutenant? That was Reg Barkley, who was standing over the navigation display. We're moving. According to this readout, we're heading for the Pulsar Nebula." "Captain's probably hoping we'll lose him in there," one of the security guards said. "All right," Kieran said. "Let's get to work. We need to seal the breach and get this damn blast door back up." They were the worst days of Sonya Gomez's life. The loss of Denny Russell had hit her the hardest. They'd been classmates at the academy, after all. His deadpan calm had always been a welcome contrast to Sonya's nervous enthusiasm. But all of them were devastating losses to the Enterprise. The 8 whose bodies hadn't been scanned were found wedged into odd parts of engineering after they'd sealed the breach. It hadn't been easy. Working in a nebula with the Borg searching for you made for difficult and tense work, but they did it. 9 of the 19 were the security guards assigned to engineering when the ship was at red alert, and who would not have left until all the engineers were out. The 10 engineers' names were imprinted on Sonya's brain from seeing it on a display. Ampelion, Bracken, Brunner, De La Guardia, Earslick, Friedel, Myers, Russell, Telota, Zelenetsky. As soon as engineering was back online, Geordi came back, along with Data and Wes, and shared with the others the plan to modify the deflector dish to emit a high EM phaser blast big enough to take out the Borg cube. What was left of all 3 shifts of engineering was tasked with this, and some people from security were brought in to assist. Still, the names flashed in Sonya's vision, but she refused to let it get to her. Not when they were forced to leave the nebula, not when the Borg subsequently attacked them, not when the Borg kidnapped the captain, and not when the Borg cube broke off and made a beeline for Earth. We'll have time to grieve later. Shelby had taken a team over to the Borg cube to get it out of warp drive and possibly rescue Picard. Once they were at impulse, the ship's warp power had to be transferred to the deflector so they could use the weapon. Sonya was standing at the warp core, her hand hovering over the control that would execute the program she and Reg Barkley had hastily written to perform the transfer. For now, they were pounding away at warp 9.6 just to keep up. In less than an hour, they'd have to shut down the warp engines anyhow, just to keep the structural integrity in field from failing. As it was, Kieran was standing over the SIF readout with the same nervous tension that Sonya hovered over her console, keeping an eye on it to make sure it didn't break down sooner. Then the Borg ship went out of warp. Wes took the ship to impulse, and as soon as the warp engine stopped, Sonya ran the program. "Power being diverted to the deflector." Kieran smiled grimly. "SIF reading nominal." From the tactical system station, Marguerite Sherman said, "Deflector at 70% power and rising." A feed was coming in from the bridge. Sonya had barely been paying attention to it until the away team reported back. What caught her were Worf's words, in reference to the captain, whom they did not rescue. "He is a Borg." Oh my god. Red shot a nervous look at Sonya. He is a Borg? What does that mean?" Sonya shook her head. "I wish I knew." She shuddered. "No, I take it back. I don't wish I knew, not even a little." Riker was arguing with Shelby and Crusher about getting the captain back versus firing the weapon, with Riker on the side of firing the weapon, when the Borg hailed the ship. The voice, technically, belonged to that of Jean-Luc Picard. It was the voice that Sonya still heard in bad dreams about hot chocolate, saying, "Yes, Ensign, it's all over me." But now the voice that had been distressed her a year and a half ago was a dull, mechanized monotone. "I am Locutus of Borg. Resistance is futile. Your life, as it has been, is over. From this time forward, you will service us." Riker's voice followed. "Mr. Worf, fire!" Marguerite said, "Power's building. Energy discharge in 6 seconds." Everyone in engineering moved to stand behind Marguerite to see the weapon that would devastate the Borg. The energy beam hit the Borg cube and had no effect. "No," Sonya muttered. From the bridge, Worf confirmed. "The Borg ship is undamaged." "That can't be." That sounded like Shelby. We're losing the coolant, Reg said. That was followed by the computer's confirmation, which was scarier in its matter-of-factness than Reg's hysterical ranting. Warning, warp reactor core primary coolant failure. Warning, exceeding reactor chamber thermal limits. Marguerite said, warp engine shutting down, weapon powering down, which matched what they were saying on the bridge. They couldn't have adapted that quickly, Riker said. The knowledge and experience of the human, Picard, is part of us now. It has prepared us for all possible courses of action. Your resistance is hopeless, number one. Hearing Locutus's dry, mechanical tones speak with Picard's voice chilled Sonya to her toes. We're dead. Kieran quietly said, the Borg ship's leaving. Or not. Sonya wasn't sure why the Borg didn't finish them off, but gift horses had bad breath, as her sister always said. All right, we need to get the warp drive deflectors and shields back online. Let's move it, people. Later on, when she would tell people about it, they would say it was anticlimactic. Sonya thought that was insane and said so. They chased the Borg, who plowed through a Starfleet armada at Wolf 359 to Earth, managing to bring Picard back along the way. Or rather, Locutus, as the captain was still a Borg drone. But Data was able to use Locutus, with some subconscious help from Picard himself, to put the Borg to sleep. The cube exploded over Earth shortly after that. The first person to give the anticlimactic declaration was Belinda, whose face on the comm screen looked disappointed. That's the best you guys could do? Not about to argue with the results, B. Well, I'm glad you're home at least, Mija. You gonna come down and see us? Evasively, Sonya said, I don't know. Depends on the repair schedule. Belinda's soccer career had come to an end due to a knee injury, and she was living back with Mommy and Poppy, which, unfortunately, was tense for everyone, as Mommy was not pleased that her eldest daughter had come home. Sonya really didn't want to face the familial strife after barely surviving the Borg. How's that boyfriend of yours? She broke into a huge smile. He's wonderful. It's been great. We just get along so well. We can talk about anything, really. But you just talk about engines, right? Sonya was about to tartly answer in the negative until she thought about it and realized that she and Kieran did still talk about work a lot. Then she remembered that their last date before the Borg mess. No, that's not all we talk about. I loaned him my Browdigan book. Belinda's eyes went wide. The one Poppy gave you? Wow, this must be true love. When she turned 15, Sonia's father had given her a 21st century leather-bound edition of the complete works of Richard Browdigan, which had become her favorite book. She had told Kieran about it, and he asked to borrow it, see what all the fuss was about, especially since he'd never heard of Browdigan. So how's he like the book? Don't know, he hasn't read it yet. Anyhow, things are going great with Kieran. Glad to hear it, S. Looks like you're finally doing well on that luxury liner. It's not a luxury liner, Sonya said defensively, and proceeded to give a lecture to a laughing Belinda about the state-of-the-art nature of the Galaxy-class vessel. Eventually they finished, and Sonya signed off, giving another evasive answer about whether she'd be able to get down to Vieques to visit the family. Then she went down to engineering since her shift was about to start. She came across Kieran in the corridor. I can't win, he said without preamble. What is it? I'm finally back on Earth for the first time in years, so I figured, great, I can drop in on Mom and Amy, see how they're doing. There's only one problem. Smiling impishly, Sonya said, they're on vacation on Beta Z? They're on vacation on Beta Z. I completely forgot about that. Kieran had told her about the vacation his mother and sister were taking 2 months ago. Somehow, Sonya couldn't bring herself to be surprised that she remembered that, and Kieran didn't. So now I've got nowhere to go, unless you have a better offer. Kieran waggled his eyebrows. Honestly, I don't, Sonya said quickly, trying to ignore the pit that opened in her stomach just then. Belinda and Mommy are at battle stations, and Kieran held up a hand. Say no more. He'd heard her stories about the on-again, off-again war between Guadalupe Gomez and her oldest daughter, and therefore knew that when it was on again, it was best to be elsewhere. Tell you what, I suggest that we suck up mercilessly to Geordi and volunteer to stay on board during the repair cycle. Sonya grinned. Suits me fine. Turning around, Kieran joined her and walking back to engineering, where they found Geordi talking to someone on a comm screen. They waited patiently until he was done, and when he turned around, Sonya saw a look he hadn't had on his face since the trip to Starbase Montgomery a year and a half ago, which was also the last time engineers who didn't report to Geordi got their hands on his engines. Seeing the two of them, Geordi quickly put on a happier face. What can I do for the two of you? Sir, Sonya said, we'd like to volunteer to stay on board during the repairs. Help you keep an eye on McKinley's people. Kieran grinned. Make sure they don't turn the warp core upside down or anything. All the tension seemed to leave Geordi's body. You don't know how glad I am to hear you two say that. I didn't want to ask anybody to stay behind, but if you're volunteering... Absolutely, sir, Kieran said. Thank you. I won't forget this. Just name your firstborn after us, sir. Kieran deadpanned. Geordi chuckled and walked over to the warp core. Sonya stared at him incredulously. Are you nuts? Sonya Kieran LaForge would make a terrible name. They laughed together, kissed quickly, and then Kieran headed off to his quarters while Sonya went on duty for her last formal shift before the repair cycle began. To be concluded next week. Thank you very much for watching. Check me out online at DeCandido.net, which has links to all sorts of stuff, including the Patreon I mentioned at the top of this. Please wear your mask, please get vaccinated if you haven't, and please stay safe. Thanks.